In just 35 seconds, one of Hollywood's most respected actors would deliver a verbal beatdown so brutal that it would leave Howard Stern speechless and scrambling for damage control. What started as Samuel L. Jackson discussing his latest project quickly devolved into a character assassination that exposed the shock jock's most uncomfortable truths, culminating in Jackson's explosive departure from the studio. The tension was palpable from the moment Jackson walked into the Sirius XM studio last night. While Stern's crew set up the microphones, Jackson sat stone-faced in his chair, clearly not in the mood for Stern's typical antics. The legendary actor had agreed to the interview to promote his upcoming thriller. But what viewers witnessed was something entirely different. A masterclass in how quickly respect can evaporate when egos clash. "Samuel L. Jackson, everybody," Stern announced with his signature enthusiasm, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing across from him. "Man, it's great to have you back. You know, I was just telling Robin before you got here that you're probably the coolest motherfucker in Hollywood." Jackson's response was ice cold. "That right there is exactly what I'm talking about." His voice carried that unmistakable edge that moviegoers know means trouble. "You think dropping an F-bomb is going to make us buddies? You think that's what being cool is about?" Stern, caught off guard by the immediate pushback, tried to laugh it off. "Hey, come on, Samuel. We're just having fun here. This is what we do." "No, Howard. This is what you do," Jackson fired back, leaning forward in his chair. "You sit behind that microphone and think you can say whatever the hell you want because you've got a contract and a fan base that eats up your shock value bullshit." The studio fell silent except for the hum of the equipment. Robin Quivers, usually quick with a comment, stayed quiet. Even Stern's notorious crew seemed to sense that this wasn't going to be their typical celebrity interview, filled with softball questions about upcoming projects and Hollywood gossip. Stern, visibly flustered but trying to maintain control, attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Look, I understand you might be having a rough day, but we're here to talk about your new movie, right? Let's focus on that." "A rough day?" Jackson's laugh was devoid of any humor. "You want to know what's rough, Howard? Sitting here listening to you pretend like you give a damn about my work when all you really want is to get me to say something controversial, so you can play it back for the next 6 months. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Stern's mouth opened and closed a few times before he managed to respond. That's not what this is about, Samuel. I've always been a fan of your work. Pulp Fiction, Snakes on a Plane, the Marvel movies. You're a legend. Don't you dare patronize me, Jackson snapped, his voice rising just enough to cut through any pretense of civility. You name, drop a few movies like that's supposed to impress me? Like that's supposed to make up for the fact that every question you ask is designed to get a rise out of me? Stern shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual confidence wavering. I'm just trying to have a conversation here. No, you're trying to create content, Jackson corrected him sharply. There's a difference. You see me as material for your show, not as a person. And that's the problem with you, Howard. You've been doing this shock jock thing for so long that you've forgotten how to have an actual human conversation. The criticism was landing with surgical precision, and Stern knew it. His face was flushing red, a combination of embarrassment and growing anger. You know what, Samuel? I've interviewed thousands of people over the years. Presidents, movie stars, musicians, and most of them understand that this is entertainment. Entertainment? Jackson's voice dripped with disdain. Is that what you call it when you ask actresses about their sex lives? When you make jokes about people's personal struggles? When you turn someone's pain into punchlines for your audience? The room temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Stern's crew exchanged glances, sensing that their boss was about to get dismantled by one of Hollywood's most articulate and feared personalities. Jackson wasn't done, not even close. You want to know what's really entertaining, Howard? Jackson continued, his words measured and deliberate. Watching you squirm when someone calls you out on your bullshit. Watching you realize that not everyone is going to play along with your little game. Stern's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the edge of his desk as he tried to regain control of the situation. Look, I get that you might have some issues with how I conduct interviews, but issues? Jackson interrupted, his voice cutting through Stern's words like a blade. This isn't about issues, Howard. This is about respect. Something you clearly know nothing about. The atmosphere in the studio had become suffocating. What started as an uncomfortable exchange was rapidly evolving into something much more serious, a public reckoning that neither man seemed prepared to walk away from. Stern's defensive instincts finally kicked in, his voice taking on that familiar edge that had made him famous for all the wrong reasons. You know what, Samuel? I've been doing this for 30 years. I've built an empire. Maybe you should show a little respect for what I've accomplished instead of coming in here and lecturing me about how to do my job. The words had barely left Stern's mouth when Jackson's expression shifted from controlled anger to something far more dangerous. If looks could kill, the shock jock would have been incinerated on the spot. Respect? Jackson's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a thunderclap. You want to talk about respect while you're sitting there acting like you're some kind of broadcasting god? I am a broadcasting legend. Stern shot back, his ego now fully engaged. I revolutionized radio. I created satellite radio as we know it. I've interviewed everyone from Donald Trump to Lady Gaga. Jackson let out a bitter laugh that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. Congratulations, Howard. You've managed to exploit famous people for 3 decades and call it groundbreaking. What a fucking achievement. The profanity hit like a slap across Stern's face. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time in the interview, he looked genuinely angry. Who the hell do you think you are coming into my studio and talking to me like that? I'm someone who's not impressed by your bullshit resume. Jackson fired back without missing a beat. I'm someone who sees right through your act. You think because you've got a microphone and a loyal audience that you're untouchable? That you can treat people however you want? Stern leaned forward aggressively, his voice rising. I treat my guests with respect. I give them a platform to promote their work, to share their stories. Platform? Jackson's voice was incredulous. Is that what you call it when you ask Scarlett Johansson about her underwear preferences? When you made jokes about Robin Williams' depression? When you turned Amy Winehouse's struggles into comedy material? The studio went dead silent. Stern's face was now beet red, and his hands were shaking slightly. Those were some of his most criticized moments. Interviews that had drawn widespread condemnation, and that he'd spent years trying to defend or explain away. That's different, Stern stammered, clearly rattled. Those were different times. The show has evolved, has it? Jackson pressed, sensing blood in the water. Because the way you started this interview tells me nothing's changed. You're still the same shock jock who thinks controversy equals credibility. Robin Quivers finally tried to intervene, her voice cautious. Samuel, maybe we can... No, Robin. Jackson cut her off, his attention laser, focused on Stern. Your boss here wants to talk about respect and accomplishments, so let's talk about them. Howard, in all your years of broadcasting, when was the last time you used your platform to actually help someone? When was the last time you elevated the conversation, instead of dragging it down to the gutter? Stern's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The question had caught him completely off guard, and his silence spoke volumes. Jackson didn't let up. That's what I thought. Jackson continued, his voice dripping with contempt. You can't answer because you've never done it. Your entire career has been built on exploiting people's vulnerabilities and calling it entertainment. That's not true, Stern protested weakly. I've donated to charities. I've supported causes. Writing checks isn't the same as using your influence responsibly, Jackson interrupted. You've got millions of listeners hanging on your every word. And what do you do with that power? You use it to humiliate guests, to spread gossip, to turn human beings into punchlines. The attack was relentless and surgical. Jackson wasn't just criticizing Stern's interview style. He was dismantling the man's entire professional legacy piece by piece. Stern tried to rally, his voice cracking slightly. You don't know what you're talking about. I've given people opportunities. I've launched careers. Whose career have you launched, Howard? Jackson challenged. Name one person who's better off because of your show. One person whose life you've actually improved, instead of just exploiting for content. Stern's silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The only sounds in the studio were the hum of the equipment and the barely audible breathing of everyone present. Jackson had asked a question that cut to the core of Stern's professional identity, and the radio host had no answer. That's what I thought, Jackson said quietly, his words carrying more weight than if he'd been shouting. 30 years of broadcasting, and you can't name a single person you've actually helped. That's your legacy, Howard. That's what you've built your empire on. Stern's voice, when it finally came, was strained and defensive. I don't have to justify my career to you or anyone else. I've earned my place in broadcasting history. Have you? Jackson leaned back in his chair, his tone shifting to something almost philosophical. History's going to judge you, Howard. And when it does, what do you think people are going to remember? Are they going to remember Howard Stern, the man who revolutionized broadcasting? Or are they going to remember Howard Stern, the shock jock who built his fame on other people's humiliation? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Stern's breathing had become noticeably heavier, and sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. This wasn't just an argument anymore. It was a character assassination being broadcast to millions of listeners, and both men knew there would be no coming back from this. Stern's voice, when he finally found it, was shaky and desperate. You know what? I don't have to sit here and take this from you. This is my show, my studio. I can end this interview right now. Jackson's response was immediate and cutting. Go ahead, Howard. Prove my point. Run away when someone finally calls you out on your bullshit. Show your audience what kind of man you really are when you're not hiding behind your microphone and your yes-men. The challenge hit Stern like a physical blow. His face was now completely flushed, and his hands were trembling with rage. I'm not running from anything. I'm trying to conduct a professional interview here, and you're being completely unreasonable. Professional? Jackson's laugh was harsh and mocking. There's nothing professional about what you do, Howard. You're a carnival barker in an expensive suit, selling people's dignity for ratings. Something inside Stern finally snapped. Years of criticism, years of defending his methods, years of being called everything from a shock jock to a cultural parasite came pouring out in a torrent of barely controlled fury. You think you're better than me? You think because you're some Hollywood hotshot that gives you the right to come in here and tear down everything I've built? I think I'm a human being who respects other human beings, Jackson replied calmly, his composure a stark contrast to Stern's unraveling. Something you clearly know nothing about. Stern slammed his hand on the desk, the sound reverberating through the studio like a gunshot. I've interviewed presidents. I've broken barriers. I've changed the entire landscape of broadcasting. You've exploited people for money, Jackson shot back, his voice rising for the first time. You've turned human suffering into entertainment. You've made millions by degrading women, mocking the vulnerable, and celebrating the worst parts of human nature. The accusation hung between them like a live wire. Stern's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak, his voice now high and strained. That's not. I never. You're twisting everything. Am I? Jackson leaned forward, his eyes boring into Stern's. Then explain it to me, Howard. Explain how asking a rape survivor to describe their assault in graphic detail is entertainment. Explain how making jokes about someone's mental illness is groundbreaking radio. Stern's silence was deafening. His shoulders sagged as the weight of Jackson's words hit home. For once in his career, the master of comebacks had nothing to say. Jackson continued, his voice now deadly quiet. You can't explain it because it's inexplicable. You've spent 3 decades hiding behind the excuse that you're just giving people what they want. But that's coward's logic. A real broadcaster, a real artist, elevates his audience. They don't pander to their worst impulses. I've done good things too, Stern whispered, his voice barely audible. Have you? Jackson pressed. Name one interview where you made someone feel better about themselves when they walked out of here. Name one conversation where you used your platform to inspire instead of tear down. The silence stretched on and on. Stern's crew had gone completely still, afraid to even breathe too loudly. Robin Quivers looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. The only sound was the steady hum of the recording equipment, capturing every painful second for posterity. Finally, Stern's voice cracked completely. I don't have to justify myself to you. No, you don't, Jackson agreed, standing up from his chair. But you should justify yourself to your audience. You should justify yourself to every person you've humiliated, every guest you've exploited, every listener who trusted you with their time and attention. Jackson began removing his headphones, his movements deliberate and final. You want to know what your legacy is, Howard? It's this moment right here. It's the moment when someone finally held up a mirror to your face and you couldn't stand what you saw. Stern watched helplessly as Jackson prepared to leave, his voice becoming increasingly desperate. Wait, Samuel, please. We can work this out. We can finish the interview. Talk about your movie. Jackson paused at the studio door and turned back one final time. His voice was calm, but carried the finality of a judge's gavel. My movie will do fine without your help, Howard. It's got something your shows never had. Integrity. You can't just walk out, Stern called after him, his voice cracking with panic. We had an agreement. You're under contract to finish this interview. Jackson's final words cut through the studio like a blade. Sue me, Howard. Add it to your legacy of treating people like commodities. The door slammed shut with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Stern sat frozen in his chair, staring at the empty seat across from him. His face had gone from red to pale, sweat still beading on his forehead. The silence in the studio was absolute and suffocating. Robin Quivers was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Howard, we should probably go to commercial. But Stern didn't respond. He sat motionless, headphones still on, staring at the door through which Samuel L. Jackson had just delivered the most devastating critique of his career. The interview that was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance had turned into a public execution of his professional reputation. The recording equipment kept running, capturing every second of Stern's humiliation for an audience of millions. For the first time in his storied career, Howard Stern had been left completely speechless, not by a brilliant comeback or a witty retort, but by the simple, devastating power of truth. Jackson had walked into the studio as a guest and left as a conqueror. Having accomplished what decades of critics and competitors had failed to do, he had broken Howard Stern on his own show. In those final moments of stunned silence, everyone in the studio understood that they had witnessed something historic. The night Samuel L. Jackson dismantled a broadcasting legend with nothing but honesty, integrity, and the courage to speak truth to power. The shock jock had finally been shocked into silence.